Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Industry and Company Data at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be talking about customer experience as we move into the holiday season and all of the human and maybe non-human purchasing and activity that's going to be going on. And with me to discuss it is Sheryl Kingstone, who heads up our customer experience team. Sheryl, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Love shopping topics.
And happy almost holidays.
Happy holidays.
Well, with all things AI, of course, we've gotten into a lot of discussions about whether or not we're going to be able to hand off some of those commerce activities to our friendly AI capabilities. What's the reality, and where do we stand in the world of agentic commerce, and where are we heading with all this?
That's a really good point. And one of the things I do want to discuss first, before we get there, is the fact that this evolution has happened for a while now, and consumers have been shifting a lot of their purchases, whether it be holiday or whether it be non-holiday, online. Right? So we know that. We've discussed that. You and I have discussed it for years. So when we move into this new world around agentic, the reality is consumers don't see it as agentic commerce, right? And consumers don't see it as AI agents. What they see it is they're just shifting the way they're searching for information. So that's the number one use case. So a lot of them are, when we look at the usage of things like ChatGPT, and these examples of what consumers are doing, it's very different depending on which generation. So as you have seen in past decades, Gen Z adopts a lot of these tools on a daily basis. Like, they were the early to use a lot of the internet back then, early to use a lot of the shopping experiences. And so they're like 72% of daily use. You go up to boomers and above, and they're like under 10%, right? They're starting to use it for general search, but they're not really doing it on a daily basis. But when we really do take a look at where the future is going, the fact that online commerce is still there, the fact that everyone is shifting a lot of their general search criteria to some of these new solutions, and that's where things get really interesting, because even the older generation is starting to use these tools as a guided advisor, believe it or not. That is one of the things they're really looking to do. And, that just raises the bar for them getting more comfortable and then leading into the shopping element.
So does this wind up being a little bit more of an on-ramp? I mean, to a greater degree than the other online experiences and potential are?
It does. It really does, because as we start building our trust with this experience and how we're using it, and it is a quite engaging platform where you're asking questions, it's offering guidance, it's saying, would you like me to go find things? And so where we see a lot of the data in some of these experiences really comes down to the traditional use cases that everyone was comfortable with from the start. So getting general advice, absolutely. Creating images, not really. That's really all Gen Z. They want to create these images. They want to do all this stuff, the writing assistant. But then you get down to things like the objective advice, the shopping assistance, visual search, really guiding some help with an application. That's when all of a sudden the differences between the generations normalizes, right? So we're not at a 30, 40 point gap. We're at a 5, 10 point gap. And that's really interesting to a lot of people. Now, we're still in the early stages of shopping in these experiences, right? We're just starting to create partnerships to be able to transact. Businesses are just starting to figure out how do they get their information into this experience. We're very used to optimizing things like search engines. So we're doing search engine optimization. We used to have visibility of all this data, and the world has shifted to all this data. Well, now all of a sudden everyone's in ChatGPT and we're blind. we don't know what to do. And that is changing the ability to truly make this experience from a brand standpoint ideal for the consumer also.
Well, you point out a really interesting aspect of this, which is that with that generational split, you had online shopping historically. You had to go master the online experience. You had to know how to do and engage. When you shift that to a natural language, conversational interaction, suddenly you've knocked down that barrier and opened the doors to much more significant engagement, easier adoption. This suddenly has become, I don't know, certainly the on-ramp, if not the holy grail, to that deeper, technically driven engagement. Although from an end-user perspective, it winds up being something that is just a much more natural way to get this interaction going forward.
Absolutely. And that's why the older generations are still very interested in this. As a matter of fact, they're a little bit higher into it than the younger generation.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
All right.
It is very interesting to see how this all plays out.
And one thing for our listeners' perspective, this is, again, being driven out of our Voice of the Enterprise data and Voice of the
and the Voice of the consumer
landscape.
Data.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which I will link to in the show notes.
Thank you.
It does create this set of challenges of now we're starting to imbue this new interface with all these extra capabilities. Is this something that I guess maybe because it's natural language based, there is an implicit trust or maybe an ingrained trust in it? But where are we in terms of trusting? Because historically, we look at consumer attitudes. There have been concerns about AI. There have been concerns about digital interactions. But fundamentally, as we start shifting towards whether or not it's chat-based, agent-based, whichever, we've got to have a lot more trust in terms of how this all gets put together.
We do. And interesting enough, we are starting to become a little bit more comfortable with a lot of the AI. We do see the normalization of it leveling out. So trust is there. When it comes to trust in businesses, we still got a quarter of people up and down really still not trusting businesses as much as they did a year ago, right? So we have that problem long before ChatGPT came into play. So we're not really tying the whole ChatGPT experience directly to the brand yet. We're using it more like a Google search. So now we're starting to understand, well, what is it doing for me? What can we do? And so this is where the industry is actually leading the charge with these newer use cases. And a lot of people are going really fast into what you had said earlier, which is the agentic side, right? So really fully autonomous experiences where these AI agents act on your behalf. I hate to tell people, but those are the use cases that are a little bit lower on the priority list for a lot of the consumers because, again, it's going to be, I'm not sure I'm ready to do this. I am not comfortable with it. I don't trust it. But if you look at the human in the loop ones, especially as it relates to these shopping type of things, providing order information, we're already used to doing that. We do want an AI agent to go out, pull it, get me the updates, right? That's kind of what we already do today with a lot of the triggers on a website and order status. Monitoring accounts for suspicious activity and preventing fraud, right? People really want that. They want to be able to know that someone's out there looking out for them and it's going to be their potential AI agent that's going to be doing that for them. Then we get into things that are a little bit more shopping related. So things like searching for or making product recommendations that meet your parameters. We spent a decade trying to get people to accept personalization, and we're slowly improving on that personalization thing. Now you have it very much in your face about making product recommendations that meet your parameters. And now all of a sudden, like, yeah, I want that. Right before it was like, don't personalize for me. You don't pay attention to me. And now we're all of a sudden we're saying, yeah, I do want that to meet my criteria. I do want the next one, which is a shopping assistant. That's a digital helper that uses AI to suggest gifts. And this is how we wrote it, right? Find deals, make shopping faster, more personalized, right? More than half want that. That's slowly getting a little creepy there. The other ones were up in the 2/3. Now we're getting a little bit more on the totem pole here. If you get below that and we start looking at things like handling orders and making payments, finding and automatically booking, paying recurring bills, then we're starting to get into the autonomous stuff, and they're just not quite there yet. And we did also do some other really intricate testing around some of these autonomous experiences and scenarios. And only a quarter of consumers across the board were really looking to have these fully autonomous experiences.
So it starts to drop off a little bit when you start getting into those areas where, you're getting towards autonomy, where you again have to have that extra level of trust in order to let it go.
Except for, the Gen Z is still almost, they're around 38%. They are looking for some of this. So I think once we get comfortable, we'll start seeing how the value discussion can come out. But before we do that, we have to build on the trust, as you said.
Now, before we get too far afield, I wanted to get back to something that you'd mentioned early on, which is that how do we engage with consumers in this world in which we've started to shift from what was the search world, and we got pretty good at ensuring that we could get consumer voices heard or retail voices heard in the consumer landscape. What happens when we start getting into chat-based environments and eventually getting towards agentic? What do organizations have to figure out in terms of how they master this new environment and how they can get themselves in a level of visibility that they had historically had in the search world?
That's the secret sauce. That's the game changer. That's what brands are struggling with today, right? So the rise of ChatGPT has really had a material impact on some of the ways that they've used to sharing information and maximizing some of these search engines, right? So now we have to really look at on things like unlocking more granular details, right? So agentic, the way consumers are looking is, find me this red dress for size 2. I'm making this all up right now. I don't really like red, and I wish I was a size 2. But this is where businesses have struggled to really open up product information, open up pricing, open up inventory. And as we start putting more of this information into an environment like this, so that you can really uncover and empower customers to find more information, engage with the brands, and using it in a much more conversational experience, we're going to have these partnerships and explore some of these ways to help brands engage in these new tools, right? Because they are a little bit more of what we used to call walled gardens, right? Another information is we don't really have a lot of the data that drives our insights. So there've been a ton of new startups and information that's looking at what we would call synthetic data, so that we can do some analysis to optimize the LLM. So they're calling them LLM optimizers now. And the problem is you're not really working with customer behavioral data at that point. You're working with synthetic data. I'm still wrapping my head around it, but it is going to be a game changer as it relates to things like we're used to doing, which is measuring differently. So this is how we have to understand it's a new world in the way we're tracking engagement, tracking metrics. We're no longer looking at clicks. So it's really about this conversational experience that needs to be measured. And that's where the future marketing is going to be going.
Well, and it's also changing some of the infrastructure pieces of this as well.
Yeah.
I look at, we've gone through a generation of various odds and ends of infrastructure controls to be able to hold off all the bots, because the bots were making our web environments so busy that it was slowing down the experience for customer reaction. Now, in fact, we do want the right kind of bots, but we want to give them enough information. I mean, there has historically been a lot of concern about bots scraping, price and availability information from a competitive perspective, and yet now you do you want some of that to go to the bots that are going to the LLMs, to the chat environments, but not to your competitors' environments? I mean, holy cow, this has started to get really complicated in terms of how much information you expose, how you expose it, being able to get smart enough about who you're exposing it to. Yeah, this is very much a brave new world.
It is. And the way I really recommend brands looking at this is start with conversational assistants in your own branded site for now, right? Because you will get your brand advocates engaged on your actual website today. So if they want these conversational experiences, these chatbots of yesteryear have never really been effective. So now historically we moved to more of these, I would say, these in-between virtual assistants. And now we're at more of these, what I would say, autonomous assistants. And what really has changed there is the difference of technology, the reasoning engines, the way that we can mimic some of the human interaction. And you can offer this up in a very trusted environment today with a lot of the technology that can help expose it within your own domain, right? So that's where you can start using these reasoning engines that are a lot more conversational. You can train them. That's where we're not just using NLP, we're using a lot more natural language generation, but deep learning with the reasoning engine behind it, which I said. But it mimics that human interaction as much as possible. And it's not just the one that's going to be on OpenAI or ChatGPT. These are ones that are under control for your own organization. And it's really the evolution from chatbot to virtual assistants to these more autonomous assistants that are low-hanging fruit to be what I would say is services the new marketing on the website for these digital channels that consumers are really interested in using.
So does this wind up being a way to pull together the various channels that retailers have had a hard time bringing together?
In a self-service scenario, yes. Right. So it's really, you get onto the website and you're struggling to find something because, we still have these websites that are complicated. We still don't know if we're going to find things inside. Do we have to dig, peck, browse, right? Where you could just get onto the website and say, look, I'm really looking for this dress, something like this, add up some pictures, get onto it. And then the assistant goes out, brings in some examples, brings in some product recommendations. You're saying, yeah, that's great. Let's go buy it. I want this. I can get this. Do you want that? It's really, think about it as a concierge on your site. And that's where it's going.
Got it. But really, it requires an elevation of the kind of capabilities that we've typically seen in some of those, I don't know, whether there's legacy chat or at least the chat that...
Absolutely. Because the legacy ones were always predetermined, pre-templated type of conversations, so they became dumb very fast. We can't do that. We need more of that dynamic interaction. They have to be a lot more autonomous with the reasoning engines because when you talk about these types of interactions, you can't pre-program them.
So they've got to be sophisticated enough. They have to have enough context. They have to be presumably plugged into your customer history, all those kinds of things. Yeah. And be able to go from, it looks like you're shopping for a dress to, it looks like you're shopping for a dress. Oh, hey, and you're in some really cold climates. You want some leggings to go with that?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I could be a first-class chatbot.
You're a shopper. You're a shopper. You even knew the climate in the leggings.
Maybe there's a future for me as a chatbot. We'll see. So when we start thinking about a lot of this shift, that next step, as we start looking at the potential to move towards more autonomy, is that something where the actual retail environment starts to be the one that is providing the agents? I mean, we've already got a whole set of external agents that, as you're identifying, doing things like, watching for discounts, those sorts of things. How does that start to shift between the external agents? We see them on bidding sites. We've seen them on all sorts of odds and ends of shopping enhancement capabilities. Is that something where the retailers start to come around and be the ones who are driving that sort of agentic capability? How does that start to work out?
Well, they're going to do it on their own. They will have their own autonomous assistants on their websites to help their customers. Absolutely. That's what they will have. Where we are starting to blur the line is when an agent from one area kind of interacts with an agent from another area. So this whole agent to agent interaction that everyone's predicting is going to be the next best thing, and we're going to really be able to scale everything. And the problem with a lot of that vision is we do have to worry about security and, biometrics and authenticating and knowing if we're really, empowered to do some of this. And how do we know it is my bot versus your bot? How do I, make sure that it is not sharing information about me and my financial recommendations with another organization that they're not authorized to? There's a lot of gotchas that we have to do. And, when it comes to transaction, we do have the industry stepping up with like Stripe and PayPal and Visa, making transactions out in these ecosystems safer, more transactional, less fraudulent. But again, that's not where the customers are completely comfortable yet.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because actually on the previous episode, Jordan McKee and Michaela Wooldridge and Sampath Sharma were talking about some of these cooperative efforts and the idea that Stripe, an organization like Stripe that is a competitor in all this, would actually start to put together some of these to try and work to set standards on agent to agent. And in fact, it sounds like there's starting to become enough collaboration around this that there's enough interest. And I guess it's one of those things that even though it may have started with your competitor, it's an ecosystem that everybody wants to play. So
Stripe is one, PayPal is another, Visa is another. Everyone's trying to figure out their influence in this ecosystem.
And it's all a matter of harnessing what is the potential, but looking at this transition to, as you're pointing out, we're moving on from what has been the traditional online world into this new level of interaction. And that starts to get into not only very different spaces, but very different partnerships, very different ecosystems, not only around the individual retailers, but for commerce in general. Look at things like we start looking at insurance. Here you have a business that already we have agents, right? We have a set of various producers. We have human agents today. And it probably isn't a big step to try and make that transition to the technology-based agent. But that's a business, again, that you have to have trust. You have to have participation. It's an area where the conversation around what's actually taking place starts to become both not only more valuable, but also potentially a little more risky. And we get right back to that issue of trust. And where's the point at which we're actually going to be able to go trust whatever that transaction is, whatever the action is that agent has taken, and take it on our behalves.
Right. But let me give you a revenue figure. Me and my revenue figures, we've talked about quantifying the customer experience over the last couple of years, right? Well, I have a new revenue figure this year that will be coming out in my upcoming preview. And we recently asked in one of our consumer surveys, have you ever had an incremental or a new purchase type of approach due to an improved product discovery from a chatbot or AI assistant? And the answer was yes, multiple times. And it calculated up to $22 billion. And this is only this year, right? This is in its infancy. So that's on a revenue opportunity. Now, if you bring in more of that service type of experience, the ability that these customers are using some of these other channels to lower the cost from a brand standpoint, lower the cost of your voice channel, being able to pick up the phone and call, right? That's where we calculated $67 billion in savings for these organizations to shift some of these calls to a lower cost channel.
Oh, wow.
So it's revenue and it's savings, both add up to revenue.
Wow. So you wind up getting and realistic cost savings, because those are things we've already seen some pretty significant numbers on. So does this get back to one of the things we talked about in the past was the idea of, high value digital native consumers who are looking for enhanced experiences, who, if when you invested in that experience, there was better brand loyalty. They bought more. It sounds like this starts to open it up to a much wider set of that consumer market, who are not that dedicated, digital native buyer, and in fact starts to engage them and, again, potentially increase revenue based on that interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up brand advocates, because one of the things I forgot to pull, and I do know it off the top of my head, is we've discussed in the past the implosion of brand loyalty and brand advocates that really happened during the COVID era, where everyone became much more price sensitive, right? So we could track this data, and it goes, I know we're not visually, but I'm using my hand, and it pummeled down. But over the last couple of years, we've seen a clawback of those brand advocates and brand loyalists. So we are now back up to where we are. And so if this is what these digitally demanding consumers are requesting, we have to make sure we're keeping up, because these are your brand advocates. They're going direct to your website. They want to engage with you. They don't want to, spend a lot of time trying to sort through where you're trying to go. They want to get in, they want to get out. Maybe they want to engage, but you want to make sure you have all that information. And that's, I'm glad to say that we do track that brand advocates are back up and motivating businesses to change their game.
It's right back to your point in all this, which is that you've got to be able to invest to be able to go capitalize on those relationships.
Yeah. Yes. And we do see investments, as you know, by tracking our tech demand indicator, where most businesses are investing today is a lot of the AI and the data analytics and the infrastructure to support these customers. So while you might not see investments in traditional customer experience applications like CRM, that's pretty much stabilized, where we're shifting dollars into is some of these new experiences, which is customer experience.
Well, it gets right back to that same old equation. You got to make sure you're meeting the customer where they are to be able to transact that business. But yeah. Well, this has been great, Sheryl. We'll have to see how the holiday season shakes out, and what's the extent of autonomous agentic action that we start to see. I haven't started my shopping yet, so we'll see. Maybe I should be digging through some agents.
Well, it is an online shopping for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and it's around the corner.
I'll have to brush up my skills and see what I can find. But it's been great having you back. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Sophie Carr for On Mediation and Kira Smith and the marketing and events teams. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we're going to be looking at the big picture in technology. There are a whole set of broad reports that are coming out, taking a look at the future of tech, and we'll have some of the authors of some of those reports on talking about what some of those insights. I hope you'll join us then, because there is always something next in tech.